They found a tin star half buried in the mud near Redemption Creek in the spring of 1891. Rusted through, bent like a broken promise. But the name etched on its back, William Cross, belonged to a man the town had hanged 14 years before that. Twice. The first time they said he deserved it. The second time they knew he didn't. Every dawn since then, when the mist rolls off the canyon and settles over Redemption like a burial shroud, folks swear they can still hear the creak of that rope. The old oak where they strung him up died the following winter, split right down the middle during a windless night, as if God himself had cleaved it in two. But this story doesn't begin with a hanging. It begins with a lie. Redemption, Texas, 1877. A town clinging to the edge of nothing. 23 buildings, a church with a crooked steeple, and a saloon that smelled like regret and kerosene. The kind of place men came to forget, or to be forgotten. William Cross rode in on a Tuesday, dust on his coat, silence in his eyes, and a star pinned crooked over his heart. He was the third sheriff that year. The first had been shot in the back. The second just left, walked out one morning and never came back, leaving nothing but his hat on the desk and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. Cross didn't talk much, didn't drink either. Kept to himself in the jailhouse, cleaning a rifle that never seemed to need cleaning, writing letters he never mailed. The townsfolk liked that about him at first. Quiet, dependable, invisible. But there was something else. Something in the way he'd pause when the train whistle blew at dusk. The way his hand would drift to his chest pocket when he thought no one was watching. The way he'd stand on the porch long after sundown, staring west like he was waiting for someone who'd never arrive. Old Samuel, the undertaker, once said, "A man who don't drink, don't talk, and don't sleep easy is a man carrying ghosts." Samuel was right. It was a bitter autumn when the Maddox gang rolled into town. 4 brothers, each meaner than the last, with a reputation for burning what they couldn't steal and killing what they couldn't burn. They took over the saloon, terrorized the shopkeepers, and dared anyone to stop them. Cross didn't move for 3 days, just sat in his office, boots on the desk, that same rifle across his lap. Folks started whispering, maybe he's scared, maybe he's bought, maybe he's both. Then on the 4th day, he stood up, walked out into the street at high noon, dust swirling around his boots like spirits rising from the earth. The Maddox brothers were drunk, laughing, shouting threats at the empty windows. Cross stopped 20 paces away. Didn't draw, didn't even touch his gun. He just spoke, quiet, steady. "You've got till sundown to leave." The oldest brother, Caleb Maddox, grinned like a devil. "And if we don't," Cross's eyes didn't blink, didn't waver, "then I bury you here." Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky was clear. The Maddox gang left before sunset. No shots fired, no blood spilled, just gone like smoke. The town loved him after that, called him a hero, bought him drinks he wouldn't touch, slapped his back and shook his hand and told stories about the day Sheriff Cross stared down the devil himself. But Cross didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He just went back to his office, locked the door, and pulled out a small, worn photograph from his chest pocket. A woman and a little girl, standing in front of a white house with roses in the yard. He stared at it till the candle burned low. Then he folded it carefully, tucked it back into his pocket, and wept in the dark. Winter came hard that year. A young widow named Clara Morgan ran the general store. She lost her husband to cholera 2 summers back,
left alone with a 7-year-old son named Thomas, who had his father's eyes and his mother's quiet sadness. Thomas took a shine to the sheriff, would sit on the jailhouse steps whittling sticks, while Cross oiled his saddle or mended a bridle. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Just the presence of each other seemed enough. One evening, as snow began to fall soft and slow, Thomas finally asked, "You got a family, Sheriff?" Cross's hand stilled. For a long moment he didn't answer, just watched the snow gather on the hitching post like tiny gravestones. "Had one," he said quietly. "Long time ago." "What happened to him?" Cross looked down at the boy, saw innocence there, saw hope, saw everything he'd lost. "I wasn't there when they needed me." Thomas frowned, thinking. "My pa wasn't there neither when he died, but Mama says he's still with us. Says love don't die easy." Cross's jaw tightened. His voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "Love don't die, son, but sometimes it just burns holes clean through you." The boy nodded like he understood, even though he couldn't. Cross pulled his coat tighter and turned away before the boy could see his eyes. That night, sitting by the stove with the wind howling outside, Cross pulled out that photograph again, traced the edges with a calloused thumb. On the back, in faded ink, were words he'd read 1,000 times. "Come home, William. We forgive you. Sarah." But he'd never gone home. Couldn't. Because forgiveness wasn't something he could give himself.
It happened in February, cold enough to freeze whiskey in the bottle. A man rode into town, tall, thin as a scarecrow, with eyes like dirty eyes. He wore a long black coat and carried no visible weapon, but danger clung to him like a second skin. His name was Silas Crow, and he knew William Cross. Knew him by another name. Crow walked straight to the jailhouse, boots echoing on the frozen planks. Didn't knock, just opened the door, and stood there smiling a smile that had no warmth in it. "Hello, Billy." Cross looked up from his desk. His face went pale. His hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. "Silas. Been a long time. 8 years? 9? Crow stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "I hear you're a lawman now. That's rich, real rich." "What do you want?" "What do I want? I want what you owe me, Billy. What you owe all of us." Cross stood slowly. "That life's over." "Is it? Because the folks here, they think you're a hero. Think you're righteous. Think you're good." He tilted his head. "Should I tell them who you really are? Should I tell them about Aberline?" The name hit Cross like a bullet. Aberline. Where it all went wrong. Where he'd ridden with Crow's gang. Where they'd robbed a bank and a woman and her daughter had been caught in the crossfire. Where William Cross had watched him die in the street while he did nothing. Frozen, a coward, complicit. Where he'd changed his name, fled west, and tried to bury the man he used to be. Crow's smile widened. "That's what I thought. So here's the deal, Sheriff. You do what I say, or I tell this whole town exactly what you are. A killer, a thief, a liar." Cross's voice came out raw. "What do you want?" "Bank job, 3 days from now. You look the other way, we ride out clean. I can't. You will, or I burn this town down and tell 'em it was you." Crow left without another word. Cross stood alone in the dark, the weight of his past crushing him like stone.
That night, Cross didn't sleep. He sat at his desk, the photograph in front of him. Sarah, little Emma, both dead because of him, because he'd chosen wrong, because he'd been weak. He thought about running, disappearing again, becoming someone new. But then he thought about Thomas, about Clara, about the people of redemption who'd trusted him. He thought about who he'd been and who he wanted to be. At dawn, he pinned the star to his chest, checked his revolver, and walked out into the street.
3 days later, Silas Crow and 4 men rode into town. The bank sat at the end of Main Street, quiet and trusting. Crow expected Cross to be gone, off on some false errand, conveniently absent. But Cross was there, standing in the middle of the street, alone. Crow reined his horse to a stop, confusion flickering across his face. Then understanding, then rage. "You stupid son of a—" "I'm done running," Cross said quietly. "I'm done being who I was. Then you'll die being nothing." Crow's men spread out, 5 against 1. The math was simple, but Cross didn't move. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then harder, turning the dust to mud. Thunder rolled overhead like the voice of God. "Walk away, Silas. Last chance." Crow laughed. "You always were weak, Billy." "Maybe, but not today." The draw was fast, brutal, final. Cross took 2 bullets, one in the shoulder, one in the side. But he didn't fall. He fired 4 times. 4 men dropped. Only Crow remained. They faced each other through the rain, blood mixing with mud, both men swaying. Crow raised his gun. "You think this changes anything? You think dying makes you clean?" Cross's voice was steady, certain. "No, but it makes me free." He fired. Crow fell, and William Cross collapsed to his knees, the rain washing over him like baptism. He survived, barely. Doc Mitchell pulled the bullets out, stitched him up, told him he was lucky. But luck had nothing to do with it. Silas Crow, dying in the mud, had whispered the truth to the crowd, told them who Cross really was, what he'd done, the blood on his hands. The town turned on him overnight. They dragged him from his bed 2 weeks later, still weak from his wounds, called him a liar, a murderer, a fraud. They hanged him from the old oak at dawn. His neck didn't break clean. He swung there, choking, dying slow, while the town watched in silence. Thomas screamed, Clara wept, and just before the darkness took him, Cross whispered 2 words, "I'm sorry." But he didn't die. Clara cut him down, breathed life back into his lungs, hid him in her cellar while the town celebrated justice. And there in the dark, she told him the truth. Silas Crow had lied. There had been no woman and child killed in Abilene, no innocent blood. Cross had left the gang before the robbery, sickened by their violence. The bank job had gone wrong without him. People had died, but not by his hand. Crow had blamed him anyway, made him believe he was guilty, twisted the truth until Cross had run from a crime he never committed. Cross wept, not from relief, but from the years stolen, the forgiveness he'd denied himself, the love he'd abandoned. Clara held him while he broke. "You're not who he said you were. You never were," he whispered. But the town demanded justice. And William Cross, finally free from his ghosts, finally clean made a choice. He walked back into redemption at sunrise, turned himself in, told the truth. They didn't believe him. The evidence was too damning, the hate too fresh, the hunger for blood too strong. They hanged him again. This time his neck broke clean. Thomas watched, clutching his mother's skirt, tears streaming down his face. The town buried him in an unmarked grave beyond the canyon, and that should have been the end.
But every dawn after, when the mist rolled in thick and cold, folks swore they could hear him. The creak of rope, the whisper of spurs, the soft sound of a man weeping. The oak tree split in two that winter. The bank closed. The church bell rang at midnight, even though no one pulled the rope. And in 1891, 14 years later, they found that tin star half buried near Redemption Creek. Still had his name on it, still carried his weight. Clara kept the photograph, gave it to Thomas when he was old enough to understand. On the back, in her handwriting beneath Sarah's faded words, she'd written, "He was good, he was kind, he was forgiven. Clara Morgan, 1878. Thomas buried it beneath the oak stump, and the haunting finally stopped. They say the West keeps his secrets, every scar, every promise, every whispered trail buried beneath the dust. Some men rode for vengeance, others for gold, a few for redemption they'd never find. William Cross rode for all three. They hanged him twice, once for his lies, once for his truth. But in the end, maybe that's what the West does best. It takes broken men and either makes them whole or buries them trying. Would you have done the same? Would you have run? Or would you have stood in that street, rain falling like tears, and faced the ghosts you couldn't outrun? Subscribe for more tales from Whispering Trails under the Wild West limits. Because out here, beneath the dying sun, every shadow has a story. And some stories never really end.